15 minutes that have been allocated. I just want to check from the room who's been to the global site user meeting this morning. Just wanted to, okay, because this is kind of an update on this, and the top question of Derek at the back of the room is hiding over there. He's the one behind the development of the global site. So for those of you that are not familiar with Global Site, Joseph and Jorg asked me today to give you an update a little bit on what our efforts have been with the open source translation management system that is Global Site, as well as some of the integrations we've put in place with machine translation engines and some of the works that we have in progress over the next few months. So I'll go through that. For those of you who don't know much about Global Site, it was an enterprise class application that was developed in the late 90s. And there's about $50 million that went into research and development into this application. And Welocalize acquired Transware 2 years ago and inherited Global Site at the time. And from our point of view as an organization, we see Global Site just more as an element of the supply chain, and decided then to take it to the open source market. So that if you go today, any one of you there on globalsite.com, you can go and download the full application, set it up, and avail of the different developments that we've had, such as machine translation. It's got its own translation memory. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, and if you have any queries, don't hesitate. I'll give you an update as to features and what we're doing with the tool in general. So just to give you an idea of what we had to do in 2008, it was still a commercial application, and we took every element, the third-party components that we migrated to open source. So if you look at the workflow engine that was in there with an existing component with iFlow, we brought that to JBoss. The database was Oracle, and it was transferred to MySQL. And you can read the other elements there. The middleware is JBoss as well. There's a scheduling with Quad. So that was the work we did leading up to the end of 2008. And the first release, open source release of Global Site was in January 2009. Since then, Derek and his team have been working on a good number of releases. And that was the first release was 7.0. Since then, so this year we had release 7.17, where we externalized the strings to make it easier to translate. We expanded the web services API for the translation memory. Some of the community in Asia actually have started to localize Global Site into simplified Chinese and Vietnamese using what we've done with the product. We have a new release coming up now as well, 7.1.8 is going to come out in August, and I'll go through that a little bit more because it includes a good few elements of machine translation as well as Global Site editions. So the first release was, just I mentioned, open source release, then externalize those strings. Now in August this summer, we're going to release Global Site editions. That means that two instances of Global Site can speak to each other, and that's one of the main drivers from the community that was required. And we also including machine translation integration with the Microsoft statistical engine. And we're also adding terminology workflow. Terminology was available as part of Global Site, but in this case there's a full workflow. There's a bit of other work that's planned for the rest of the year. In December, we're going to have our next release, most likely at this stage. And we've announced some partnership with Taos TDA that have chosen Global Site as their platform. So they're working on the integration with our team. And over the next 6 months, that's going to happen in the next release. Therefore, we'll have an integration with the TDA SuperCloud. We're also working on Workbench with a product called CDAC in India, and this is part of the community effort to continue to develop on global sites. So we have a number of employees internally that we use like developers at Welocalize, but CDAC has made available a number of developers for us, and we're looking for always more contribution from the community that wants to see different kind of features added onto a global site. Just to give you an idea of where we're at in terms of machine translation, because that's one of the topic today that you guys were interested. Not only like in the next release we have the machine translation engine from Microsoft, but GlobalSite has been already integrated over the last 18 months with the Google engine for machine translation, as well as with a commercial application called ProMT, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So these three engines are now available as part of the interface. Once you set up GlobalSite, you can just go in there and decide to turn on whichever engine you require for the projects that you're working on, depending on the profile. And that works in parallel with the translation memory engine that we have in there. So there's a number of options, but the most common we've seen so far and that we're working on with a number of clients is to combine both translation memory with an empty engine. So usually you select your main translation memory within your profile. You add a number of reference TMs, whether they're different products in your organization, different departments, or other TM you may have available, and then you link it to a machine translation engine. So that's going to take some processing time, where every time it goes out to, for instance, the Google engine or the Microsoft engine, to go and take whatever you've decided. You decide on a threshold, say, okay, anything below a 75 or 85% match is going to go to the machine translation engine and come back as a 100% empty match. And then your translators, your group of community can decide, the kind of the benefits generated by the empty engine. So we've been working on a number of implementation with different clients, where the first step is really to look at what are the gains from these different empty engine, which empty engine is more useful for them, for what language pairs. And so we're running, behind that, we're running some manual post-editing to see what are the gains in productivity using these empty engines. And that's pretty much it from our side. To give you an update on the MT integration, as I mentioned, there's a number of organizations that have adopted GlobalSite. Taos is the latest one, and by the end of this year, we'll have an integration with with the TDA. A number of other organizations that are using GlobalSite. That's their main platform. We have AOL, who's been one of the early adopters that have contributed as well to the development of CrowdSite that sits on top of GlobalSite as a crowdsourcing application. Verizon in the States has implemented GlobalSite. There's a number of instances of GlobalSite within Microsoft for different groups, like the Games Group, and the European Operations Center is using GlobalSite to speed up some of their translation processes. And a number of other, I know the Rosetta Foundation has been working closely with Welocalize as well to provide the structure behind what they're doing with translators without borders. That's it for me. Any questions?
Thanks, Antoine. Question? Yes, Willem? Drive this works, yeah. Since it's open source, what is the process to integrate changes developed by users in the core of GlobalSite?
So, Derek, do you want to take that one?
No, you're doing my part.
Yeah.
So one of the things we do realize is that with the GlobalSite is about 1.7 million lines of Java code. And we've a team, we've just recently extended the development team in Welocalize to about 15 people. But we do have a challenge to try and understand how we can incorporate changes from the community into our QA process, because obviously we don't want to go off with code forking, which will ultimately be destructive to the platform. So we're certainly, at this stage, we're very good at working with the larger pools of developers. So Antoine mentioned CDAC, we're also working with Beijing University, and obviously with the Taos TDA. So we very much have our house in order in terms of how we work with those groups on collaborative development. But the next phase for us is to understand how to grow that developer community. And my guess is that with the direction we're taking GlobalSight in terms of it as a translation engine within a localization ecosystem, with all the functionality of GlobalSight exposed by web services, we would expect that the community of developers will actually grow around building thin clients like workbench tools and engineering tools that will interact with GlobalSight. So we're now focusing on how to build that developer community around the web services functionality, which obviously gives them much easier access to develop new features and functionality without having to try and delve into what is an enterprise scale application. So.
Last question, Joseph?
Yes, so open sourcing can be a form of crowdsourcing.
Wait for the mic, Joseph. There's a mic coming.
Open sourcing can be a form of crowdsourcing, but in a very different way compared to Willem's talk.
Yeah.
Was that the main motivation why you decided to go open source, or what was the main motivation to take that step?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. There's a different number of elements. You look at the technology organization in our industry, and there's very few big success commercially of the tool. So we inherited GlobalSight for free as part of an acquisition. And it's an enterprise class application, as I mentioned, and we looked at it and said, does it make sense for Welocalize to go and commercialize that tool and build a structure behind it, to say, okay, this is going to be part of our offering as a separate kind of a line of services to the industry. Or bring it to the open source market and make it available to everyone, including our competitors, and take what is an enterprise class application to the next level with the community, and hope that with hard work and passion like Derek's team is doing, is to develop a community around it and spin it off to a certain extent as a separate organization that runs its own track and its own development cycle. And so it's working to this stage, it's been hard work to kind of advertise around what was trying to be done here, and the different kind of features that we've developed on top. So we're spending a lot of money ourselves to develop that. We've involved a number of organizations in the industry that are very interested to see a third-party application that is not owned, because it's an open source now, by any commercial organization somehow, and take their own destiny in their own hands and push that agenda further. So that's what's been happening. The community now is helping a lot. We work with CDAC, for instance, to develop a workbench tool. So they're developing the workbench that's going to be made available later this year. We're working with the Rosetta Foundation, for instance, to see what we can do with that. And I know we're also working with the Center for Next Generation Localization that I know is looking into machine translation engines as well that may work with GlobalSight. And so now it's becoming a real community and crowdsource effort to a certain extent, and we hope to see that growing over the next few years. And certainly, there's a few initiatives that have helped along that way. For us, it's more like to bridge. We're organizing meetings with our translators, with our clients, and for us, it was more like to bridge that first mile and last mile. Like the translators on one side that get access to a free tool there, and our clients and the industry clients that can access that as well.
Okay, thanks again.